This video is going to talk about the two main stages of photosynthesis, which is the light-dependent reactions and then the dark reactions, also called the Calvin cycle. What photosynthesis does is it uses the energy from light to fix, which means incorporate, the carbon in carbon dioxide into a high-energy organic molecule. And that high-energy organic molecule is glucose. Now, plants need glucose for various reasons. They need it for energy, in cellular respiration, breakdown to make ATP, for storage, and then they also need it for structure, because a plant's cell wall is made out of cellulose, a polymer of glucose. So keep in mind that plants carry out photosynthesis to make glucose for these three reasons. Let's look at the equation for photosynthesis so we can better see what is going on in this process. Photosynthesis takes the carbon from carbon dioxide, so that's CO2. It's going to use some water. And the products are glucose, C6H12O6, plus oxygen gas. So oxygen gas here is our waste product. We don't want that. And glucose is what we're actually trying to produce. Now I need to balance this equation because we're going to make a glucose molecule with 6 carbons in it. Well, we need to put in 6 carbons in the first place, so that's 6 CO2. And we're also going to need 6 waters, and we're going to produce 6 oxygen molecules. Now glucose is a very high energy molecule. It has lots and lots of energy in it, and we know from cellular respiration that we can break down glucose and extract the energy from it and make loads of ATP. Now carbon dioxide here is a low energy molecule, so this reaction is endergonic. Energy needs to enter it if we're going to make this high energy glucose molecule here. So where does that energy come from? It comes from light, specifically photons in light, which is a particle of light. Now photosynthesis is split into two reactions: the light-dependent reactions and the dark reactions, also called the Calvin cycle. Now the light-dependent reactions happen in the presence of light. They require light. Now what the light-dependent reactions are doing are capturing the energy from light and putting them into high-energy organic molecules called NADPH. And you've seen that before in cellular respiration. So these parts of the equations here, this water here, this light here, and this oxygen here, these are all the light-dependent reaction parts of the equation. Now the job of the Calvin cycle is to make a molecule called G3P, which is basically a precursor, something required to make glucose. Here's where the carbon comes from to make glucose, and here's the product of the glucose. So these parts here are the light independent or the dark reaction part of this equation. So if we were to summarize the light dependent reaction, what we're doing is we're capturing the energy in light into NADPH, and we're also going to make some ATP. Right, so we're making NADPH and ATP using the energy from light. We're going to use some water to do that, and the waste product is going to be oxygen. If we are going to summarize the dark reactions, we are going to use the products of the light-dependent reaction, which is NADPH, to fix the carbon in carbon dioxide into glucose. That requires energy, taking a low energy carbon molecule here, carbon dioxide, into a high energy molecule requires energy. The energy is coming from the light dependent reactions. So the light dependent and the dark reactions are linked. The products of the light dependent reaction feed into the dark reactions, and you'll see later that the products of the dark reactions feed back into the light dependent reactions, and we're going to siphon off some glucose while we're at it. So let's look at the light dependent and the dark reactions in detail to see how these processes happen. Okay, so this is a diagram of the membrane of the thylakoid. And if you can remember, in our chloroplast, there's a double membrane. This fluid here is called the stroma, and these are the thylakoids. So the light-dependent reaction that requires light is going to happen in the membrane of the thylakoid here. We need some electrons and we need some protons. Where are we going to get those from? Well, let's look down here at the equation. One of the reactants is water. Now, water, if we split water up into what it's made of, we can get hydrogens. And if we split those up further, we can get protons and electrons, and then we'll have some oxygen. That oxygen is going to be released. So down here in our equation, there you go, there's our first part that's already been produced. Our waste product was oxygen from splitting water into protons and electrons. Well, this molecule here is called photosystem 2. This molecule over here is called photosystem 1. What photosystems do is capture the energy from light via pigments called chlorophyll in this wavelength here, and they're going to energize an electron. Where does that electron come from? It comes from splitting water. So this electron is going to be energized. It's going to be passed between these molecules here, which forms an electron transport chain to photosystem 1. And as it flows, its energy is harnessed. Where did that energy come from? It came from light. We are going to use the energy from light to energize an electron. As that electron flows down this electron transport chain, the energy from it is used to pump protons from low to high concentration of protons. So against their concentration gradient. That is active transport. It's like pushing a rock up a hill. It requires energy. We've now got a high concentration of protons inside the thylakoid. And this molecule over here is called ATP synthase. The way ATP synthase works is that protons flow through it and it allows it to make ATP. How are we going to get protons to flow through ATP synthase? We're going to create a concentration gradient. That's what we've just done here. So protons are going to flow from high to low through ATP synthase, and ATP synthase is going to make ATP from ADP and a phosphate. That is one of the products of the light-dependent reaction. Now the electron is over here in photosystem 1. We're going to zap it again with some more energy, some more photons. Now, if you remember what we said earlier, one of the products of the light-dependent reactions was NADPH, which is a high energy molecule. We're going to use the energy from light to reduce NADP into NADPH. Remember, we're reducing its gaining an electron. Well, this is where the electron's going. It's going on to NADP to make NADPH. So this is another product of the light-dependent reaction. So to summarize the light-dependent reactions, we have first used the energy from light here to energize an electron. That electron was gained by splitting water into protons, electrons, and oxygen. The oxygen was released. the electron was energized, the protons are going to be used in this step here. So we use the energy from the electron to pump protons from low to high concentration, that's active transport, requires energy, to create a high concentration of protons on this side of the membrane. That allowed those protons to then flow from high to low through ATP synthase, and we then made ATP. So one of the products of the light-dependent reaction is ATP. The second step of the light-dependent reaction, we zapped that electron with some more light energy, and we use that energy to be able to reduce NADP into NADPH, which is going to feed into the light-independent, aka the dark reactions. On to the dark reactions of photosynthesis. So the dark reactions, whilst they don't need light, they do need the products of the light-dependent reaction. And the products of the light-dependent reaction were ATP and NADPH. ATP and NADPH are high energy molecules. NADPH is going to provide electrons and ATP is going to provide energy. So we're going to use these products of the light-dependent reaction to fix the carbon in carbon dioxide into a precursor of glucose, a molecule that we're going to use to make glucose. Very much like the Krebs cycle of cellular respiration, the Calvin cycle is a cycle. The reason it's a cycle is because it's a lot more efficient to make a biological molecule, the one that we want, by fiddling with an already existing biological molecule than it is to build, for example, glucose completely from scratch using carbon dioxide. So this molecule here is CO2, carbon dioxide. This molecule here is called rubisco bisphosphate, RuBP. It has 5 carbons. And we're going to track the carbons as we go through, so pay particular attention to what's happening with the carbons. Carbon dioxide here has 1 carbon. What we're going to do is stick this carbon from carbon dioxide onto RuBP. And we have now made a 6 carbon molecule. So really importantly, we have incorporated a carbon, this carbon here, from an inorganic molecule, carbon dioxide, into an organic molecule, RuBP, to make this 6 carbon molecule here. We've managed to get carbon into an organic molecule. So really, really important, that's the first step. We have fused a carbon from carbon dioxide onto RuBP to make a 6 carbon molecule. We are then going to split that 6 carbon molecule into 2 3 carbon molecules called G3P. Glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate, you can just call it G3P. G3P is a precursor to making glucose. You notice that they've got 3 carbons each, and then here's glucose over here. Glucose is a 6 carbon molecule. So we can make glucose by fusing together 2 G3P molecules. So 2 times G3P equals a glucose molecule. However, we've now stopped our cycle. These carbons here have now just all gone into glucose. So what actually happens is we're going to run 6 of these cycles at the same time. 6 RuBP molecules and fuse 6 carbon dioxides to them. Now this is all happening independently, so there's 6 cycles. One cycle is going to fuse 1 carbon onto RuBP, and another cycle is going to fuse 1 carbon onto a RuBP. And do that 6 times. So there's 6 of these cycles going on at the same time. When we split that 6 carbon molecules up into 3 carbon molecules, we're going to have 12 of these. Now let's look at how many carbons we've got here. 12 G3Ps, we've got 36 carbons here. Now let's look over here. We've got 6 times 5 carbon molecules. That is 30 carbons. in these molecules here. Notice how we've now got this extra 6 carbons. Those 6 carbons came from carbon dioxide, 6 carbon dioxides. Out of these 12, we're going to siphon off 2 of them and use those 2 G3Ps to make glucose. So we've now got 10 G3Ps. So this is 10. Through a series of reactions, we are going to recycle those 10 G3P molecules back into the 6 RuBPs. So we're back to where we started. What we have gained from this cycle is these 2 G3Ps that were siphoned off here, which are going to make glucose. So to make 1 molecule of glucose, the Calvin cycle is going to run 6 times. So if we go down to our equation here, this is where these 6 carbon dioxides come from. So 6 carbon dioxides is going to make 1 glucose molecule. Now, one thing we've not mentioned is that the dark reactions carbon cycle requires the products from the light-dependent reaction, which is ATP and NADPH. We're making a high-energy molecule here, and this requires energy. So in this process, we are going to get NADPH from the light-dependent reactions, and that is going to provide its electrons and go back to NADP. And we're also going to get our ATP from the light reactions and convert that back to ADP and a phosphate. Do you remember what the light-dependent reactions needed? They made NADPH from NADP, and they made ATP from ADP and phosphate. So this here and this here, these are going to go back into the light-dependent reactions to be re-energized into these molecules that we need using the energy from sun. So the light-dependent and the light-independent, the dark reactions, are linked. The products of the light-dependent reaction feed into the dark reactions. And the products of the dark reaction, aside from glucose, feed into the light-dependent reactions. So they are a coupled reaction.